Okay, we are going to kick things off. Thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. Our topic for today is innovation and how it begins with a spark. So we're going to kick things off here with a quick introduction from our Chief Growth and Innovation Officer, John Take. And then we'll watch a very brief film on the impact of innovation and the importance of innovation, and then we'll move over to our live discussion with our illustrious panel and open it up to some Q&A. So with no further ado, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Take, and I'm Stantec's Chief Growth and Innovation Officer. At Stantec, we are committed to innovation, which accelerates value creation for our clients and our colleagues. Innovation happens at Stantec every single day as we invest for the long haul. The way we solve problems demands novel approaches, and looking at problems in more than one way develops stronger solutions. All across Stantec, we're redefining what's possible for our clients, communities, and ourselves. Today, we launch Sparks, where each quarter we're premiering a short film focused on the human impact of innovation and how we're making a difference for our clients and our communities. First up today is It Begins with a Spark, featuring 5 of our innovative minds and how they're using novel ways to solve client problems. Just watch how they're accelerating to create value. And after the film, we look forward to a panel discussion with all 5 of the film's participants. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the film.
The world is changing, and we need to adapt. I have a bit of innovation fatigue. The word innovation is a buzzword.
If you're not actually innovating, if you're not thinking more critically, if you're not thinking through complex problems, then yeah, it's a buzzword.
I always put forward the problem. It's a problem statement. I actually sit them in a room and I'll say, nothing's crazy. There's no crazy ideas here. Thinking of way beyond the boundaries of what's previously been done.
We must think and do better because the challenges that our communities are facing, the issues, the money, the lack thereof, they're all changing at an exponential rate. We don't have an option but to innovate at that same rate.
No place is safe, and every place can use technology to address the speed of change in our world today.
Modeling flood in the traditional way around the globe would take thousands and thousands of years using these old models. Flood Predictor takes the traditional engineering models and it applies AI to those models in order to make predictions. A traditional study can take 90 days, and with Flood Predictor, I just ran a simulation this morning, it took 15 minutes.
We don't have time. We don't have time to see if a traditional idea fails anymore.
So the building sector contributes to 40% of these greenhouse gas emissions. What we tend to offer is the carbon cost modeling. We want to make sure that first we're planning for targets that are achievable, and that is done by understanding your building's consumption of energy, trying to reduce that at first, and then what are the opportunities? What are things that you can integrate early on to those designs that could serve to reduce those emissions?
The old flume bridge used to transfer nearly half of the region's water supply. If we get a big seismic event or a big earthquake, the old concrete box was going to end up in the river. The original project was to actually fix the old bridge up. And then we went, that's not right. We're not going to get resilience and longevity by fixing the bridge up. So we started to think about how can we put a bridge in there to work with nature, not work against it. This was built with a 100-year design life. There will be lots of generations that will have the water supply protected.
Stantec's Vulnerability Assessment Program is a resource where we can understand assets and hazards in a very short amount of time. The purpose is to reduce the risks to our communities, is to reduce vulnerability, and to ensure that when investments are made at your community, at whatever level, that investment is well thought out. We have to think more broadly about how our plans, our investments, our projects are not just happening in the community, but they are becoming the community.
We cannot afford to keep pumping out carbon emissions into the atmosphere, right? We're going to need clean energy technologies like nuclear. Conventional nuclear plants, you have very, very large nuclear islands. You have a very large reactor pressure vessel. But with these small modular nuclear reactors, some of the technologies run at atmospheric pressure, so you don't need large plant and large equipment anymore. A 300 megawatt SMR can power 300,000 homes. A gigawatt, you know, you're really up there now. You're at 1 million homes, right? They're the kind of energy levels we're talking about. You no longer need to have hundreds of acres of land to do this kind of thing. I strongly believe every community in the future will end up having some form of nuclear energy.
When I look back on my life, I have two key goals. I want to give more than I take, and I want to change the world.
For me, it's the people that we work with. It's the solution that we give for the people that will benefit from this for a long time after we're done.
I love the problem of technology with a complex field like engineering and science.
To be able to be part of the industry and the frontier of energy and innovation and technology, it is a pinch me moment for me.
I'm so inspired that my kids see how meaningful my work is. It makes me want to wake up the next day and do better.
I'm proud that Stantec cares to put people like me in positions to make a difference.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed the premiere of Stantec's first Spark film, a high-level look at some of our most innovative people and their projects. And they're live with us today to discuss the necessity of innovation in solving complex problems in an increasingly complex world. And we want this to be an interactive discussion. So if you have a question about what you saw in the film, or have something to add, or perhaps looking for clarification about a point that is made, let us know in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get you the answer you're looking for. My name is Mike Arsenault, and I work with the innovation and digital marketing team at Stantec. So why don't we meet our panelists in a little bit more in depth at this moment. First up, Nadia Vogt. Nadia?
Hi all, my name is Nadia Vogt. I am in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am a resilience specialist and change maker here at Stantec.
Thanks, Nadia. Jag Singh.
Jag Singh, I'm the regional sector lead for clean generation with a specific focus on nuclear energy and small modular nuclear reactors.
And this panel discussion has a global reach. Thank you very much, Jag. The MVP of this discussion, Mark Valina, it's 5 o'clock in the morning in New Zealand, but he was very committed to answering any questions you may have about innovation. Mark, thank you very much for being with us here today.
You're all very welcome, Mike, and kia ora and good morning from New Zealand. It's 5 a.m. or just after 5 a.m. here in New Zealand, and for all of you folks out there, Wednesday's going to be a great day. So so my name is Mark Valina. I'm project director with Stantec here down in the bottom of the world, and I work in our water team, and I work on a lot of major projects.
Awesome, thank you very much, Mark. And our last member of the panel, Jeff Albee.
Hi there, Jeff Albee. I recently relocated to Tampa, Florida, and I lead our digital consulting and solutions team.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for being here. Looking forward to an engaging discussion. So Nadia, let's kick things off with you. Let's talk about your work in building resilience in underserved communities. And can you maybe give us a concrete example of how you've gained client buy-in and trust when introducing new approaches?
Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of working with communities for well over 15 years. And one of my areas of specialty is with our underserved communities. And what I found is the most meaningful component is really creating a comprehensive understanding, not only with the client, but with the communities as well. So we know that when our clients are creating RFPs and project concepts, that they have a very specific, understandable lens in which they're viewing, right? That perspective. We also know that there's a clear objective for these projects, right? Investments don't just happen. There's a reason that these investments are happening. So I think our innovation, when it comes to thinking about where there are planned critical investments, especially around infrastructure, housing, and structural investments, and with our at-risk communities or underserved communities, is really being able to have Stantec bring in these other perspectives. So we want to say, hey, we understand that your goal from the, for example, the municipal perspective is this. We also want to bring in other perspectives, whether that's from a state, a nonprofit, the environmental side. What does that look like? So we can really create comprehensive plans and processes for these communities. When we're thinking about investment, there's such limited investment at all levels of our communities that are going in. So we really want to maximize, what does that dollar do for your community, and what does that look like? And Stantec brings that, and that's that innovation and resilience piece of saying, hey, how can we make more bang for your buck, right? How can we maximize this investment? So one way that I've been able to do that in my career, and something that I bring to my clients, it's building trust, but it's also building understanding. So it's saying, who else needs to be in the room when we're having these discussions, even though you're the asset owner? Who could be impacted by this investment? Who might this investment need to have take care of it? And so in our underserved communities and in our underserved communities, what we look to do is say, let's bring in these voices at key critical milestones in the planning process. And what that does is it increases understanding about the need for that investment in the first place, and it builds ownership and stewardship over that investment. And those two things are really critical, because when you do that over and over and over again, what you start building is actually political power and will. So when communities or municipalities or clients want to make another investment, you actually have community buy-in and input that say, hey, we support this because we understand the need for X. And so it's about building up the community's understanding, bringing the right people to the table, and really helping the client understand from the client, what do you want to achieve, and help us bring in additional perspectives. One of the ways that I've done that is working with a primarily Latino community on Milwaukee's south side. We had a very big flood risk reduction project that was happening along an urban waterway and an urban river. And traditional engineering would say, yep, rip out the concrete lining, expand the river and the regulatory floodplain, allow for more flood flows, and your flooding is reduced. But one of the things that I brought to the table was saying, we need to do more. We need to ask people about their inputs. We're having property acquisition. What does this look like? Let's talk to people about the risk of flooding and what they can do in the short term to help supplement this long-term investment.
Now, Jeff, as an expert in kind of marrying science, engineering, and design with digital technologies, conversations that you and I have had quite a bit over the past few weeks and months, can you maybe give us an example of how you balance disruptive innovation, like, for example, the integration of emerging technologies, with maintaining core business operations?
Sure, Mike, thanks for the question. I guess I'll start by saying that technology just changes so fast these days. It's hard to keep up, and we have to prioritize some more constants there. And we tend to prioritize things like business value and human impacts over those technical aspects, because that's really what our customers care about when we're solving their problems. So yeah, by way of an example, for example, we're supporting Honeywell with a digital transformation initiative around their automating their environmental monitoring, lab sampling and analysis, and chain of custody for all their records. And rather than focusing on things like the cloud and the technical aspects of that delivery, we're more in the trenches working with their engineers to digitize their unique sampling process from end to end and drive efficiency across all the layers, the managers, the engineers, the laboratories, and the regulators. And then we apply the technology, whatever state of the art would be at that time, to that business process. The technology may change, but of course the value of compliance and people's time is always the constant. So we stay pretty agile on the tech and make sure to deliver the business value first.
So Jeff, there's a little bit I want to add on there as well. I have a real difficult time sometimes convincing our clients that's worth the cost value benefit, right? So it's a kind of hard thing for me to get across there to say, have a look, invest in this kind of technology. I know it may be new to you, but I find that quite a bit of a difficult thing sometimes to have a conversation, convince them, because a lot of clients, when they look at the overall project cost, they're trying to really, really cut it back, especially in this market right now, cut back project costs and timescales. So that kind of front end investment in setting up models and executing this technology, I find quite difficult, right? So, especially in some of the mining clients working, with it, they just want to get mining operations going or oil and gas operations going to get revenue going as quick as possible. So I struggle with that a little bit, and I don't know if you have the same experiences.
Constantly. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And that's where Stantec can be, a real differentiator, I think, in this, in my market, especially digital for customers. JAG, for example, your customers, they trust you and they know that you know their business very well. And we can come at that angle as an expert in their people and their process and work to sell them on these things. And I say sell, sometimes that's needed. And a lot of times it literally is a trial, a pilot, a business analysis, not necessarily a full-blown, technology implementation. Sometimes these things fail, sometimes it's not the right solution. So this is that whole bit of agile and being not in the literal sense of the process necessarily, but being a bit adaptable and working from a point of trust with our clients and understanding their processes and what's important. I can guarantee that, your mining example, a violation or a compliance violation with one of your customers is going to sting a lot more than a 50,000, 100,000, even a $500,000 technology initiative to try to improve their processes. So I'm not saying, go from the fear aspects necessarily, but work from that partnership angle and challenge yourselves and your customers to, find these efficiencies, not thinking about the technologies later. Where can we improve your environmental sampling program, Mr. and Mrs. Honeywell? Where can we improve your reporting operations at mine sites? Mr. Ballet, Mrs. Ballet. So we, work from that trust and work from the customers and our experience with them as the starting point.
I think one thing to add to that as well is that we see, there are limited resources. We understand that. At Stantec, though, we're looking at that big picture. We want to maximize doing it right the first time, right? Mark, in your video, you said, hey, we could redesign the bridge the way it was, but is that the right thing to do, right? And so when you think of it from that perspective, if you're going to spend money, if our clients are going to spend money, it's our job and our responsibility to say, hey, this is the best value for this money, right? Because we don't want to cut corners. We don't want to give something limited that has a higher potential of failure later on. We want to be able to say, we really need to understand what the challenge is and create a thoughtful, cohesive solution to that challenge. And this is what it looks like, right? Maybe you didn't think about this piece, but based on our experience, we suggest that this piece be added because it's going to give you a better outcome, right? It's going to maximize the investments that you make up front to make sure that your investments are resilient, that your investments are long-standing, and that they're more flexible. And so I think that this combination really helps. And Mark, I know that you all did that in that project you mentioned, but that's what Stantec does across the board, right? We look at what's given to us in a scope or an opportunity. Our job is to think creatively. Our job is to think beyond what we're seeing and say, this is how we think this should be able to work. Let's talk about it.
Great points, all. Great discussion. I want to hear from Mark and kind of build on what Nadia was saying. Before I do that, again, anyone has any questions or comments, please let us know in the Q&A, and we can try to answer your question or react to your comment to the best of our ability. So, Mark, in the video, as Nadia mentioned, you spoke about taking a different approach than was originally intended with the original Flume Bridge. What are some of those challenges that you faced when trying to implement this new idea and pivot to a pipe bridge, and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yes, as everybody's already mentioned, money's always a challenge, right? So the brief came to us to fix up the old bridge. It was 74 years old. It was leaking water, and it was a key asset in the region for the water supply. So the brief came to us: fix the bridge up, make it resilient, make it last, specifically in the seismic event down here in New Zealand. We're pretty active in that space. So as a team, we got together and we went, what is this going to give us? This budget that we have, this brief that we have, is just going to make a short-term difference. And that just doesn't feel right from a whole life cost. So working with our client, working with the contractor, and working with our engineers, we looked at this differently. We said, what are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to secure the water supply for a very long time. So that's where we pivoted. We pivoted to a longer solution. The aspiration is a 100-year design life, and we weren't going to achieve that with an old bridge and just fixing it up. So it's working with the stakeholders. I think, Nadia, you mentioned there about bringing together all the key people that have a stake in this and bringing them on that journey. And then the conversation was easy. Our client council and the water operating company all bought in really quickly and went, this is the right thing we need to do here. We need to find that funding. We need to put the long-term solution in place.
Thanks, Mark. Now, Jag, your focus on clean energy and small modular reactors is fascinating. You and I have had discussions about this previously as well. So how do you ensure that innovative efforts like these kind of align with your overall business strategy? And you touched on a little bit this with your discussion with Jeff, but I'd like you to just maybe dive a little bit deeper if you can.
Yeah, sure. I mean, essentially, business strategy comes down to growth, right? That's what we want to do. We want to grow. So innovation goes hand in hand with that, right? So one thing we're doing at Stantec is early positioning in a lot of different changing markets. And we have to be agile and adaptive enough to follow the innovation trend, right? So as innovation progresses and these new technologies are emerging, whether it's small modular nuclear reactors and all the various portfolio of technologies you have there, or if it's kind of new ways of treating waste, nuclear waste, that those technologies, that innovation is always ongoing. And really, as an industry, you can feel a second renaissance coming here in the nuclear industry across the world. You hear a lot of noise, you see a lot of news with all the different nuclear initiatives that are going on. So I think one of the key things to do as a business strategy is just remain agile and adaptive to be able to facilitate that positioning for all the changes that are happening. And there's geopolitics there as well, right? That's a big part of it. And an example of that is as small modular nuclear reactors or technologies are being developed, the innovation that comes along with that is a new or a different type of nuclear fuel, for example. So that's HALEU, high assay low enriched uranium in a lot of cases. And that fuel supply was all from Russia. And obviously with the geopolitics of what happened over the past number of years has led to a closing of that supply of that fuel. So now we have to pivot and be innovative. And how do we adapt and how do we change to that? So my business strategy really always is about being agile and adaptive. And another part of that is being able to kind of look at the broader picture of innovation across the nuclear industry. You'll see a lot of noise, and you hear a lot of noise about small modular nuclear reactors. But we just talked about the fuel. What about the upend fuel supply? What's the innovation that's happening at the bookends of our industry? What are we doing about innovative technologies when we're, producing uranium or enriching uranium or producing fuel that goes in the reactors? And what about the back end? Where's the innovation with nuclear laboratories for sampling or testing? And what do we do with nuclear waste, right? And there's technologies out there that are essentially recycling nuclear waste now. So innovation is always changing. As a business, our strategy has to be able to adapt along with that as it just constantly morphs.
I think with that, something that really just struck me is that pivot. And as a project manager, as a client, as a project manager, as anyone, I don't think anyone can say, yep, the idea that I had came off perfectly and every single step went exactly how I wanted it, right? That's not what happens. What you do is you hire good teams because they can say, yep, I know that things are going to go wrong, but what a good team like Stantec does, we keep you in the boundaries, right? We're assessing risk, we're managing innovation, we're thinking about these pivot points that could happen. And because we have such an incredible global team, we're able to adjust, right? So when you talked about that fuel consumption and your need to adjust to potentially alternative fuel sources, we got someone for that. We've got someone that we can go to bring in to say, hey, we went a new direction because of this pivot. Let me consult with another specialist.
Example of that, right? So one of our clients that are working, the provincial clients up here in Canada, We're just bouncing ideas off each other. And, I'm taking my UK nuclear experience here as well and saying we have a ton of national labs which end up morphing into communities, Nadia, things that you're talking about earlier, the value add to the communities. So if you have a nuclear laboratory, you're sort of almost producing an ecosystem now for an incubation chamber for the industry and the technologies, but it also serves the local community. So now you have an education center, you have training simulators. Kids in the local communities now come and visit and learn, and there's real organic, grassroots growth with the energy sector and technology and innovation. It all goes together. So
Right.
It's a really important point.
And I wonder, Mark, where you had to pivot, obviously, when you were thinking about, hey, are we going to design this traditional bridge or are we going to redesign? Tell us about that. How did you rethink that? How did you rethink about shifting that design and that pivot in making that bridge project a success? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, it's putting a team together, Nadia, and I think Jag mentioned it before in one of our panel discussions, right? It's asking the daft question, right? And sometimes you may even have a graduate in the room, and they might just say, "Oh, what about this?" And not to sound too cheesy, but that's the spark. That's the thing that kicks you off into, let's look at this in a different way, right? We had some real crazy ideas around the bridge, at the start around hanging pipes off the bottom and coming up with some complicated systems, and it was great. And the client enjoyed it. Our client council enjoyed it. Everybody that was part of that process enjoyed it. And as engineers, we sometimes say, "Oh, there are rules, there are standards, there are things we must do." Right? Nah, rip it all up. All right, figure it all out. And I think the global reach that we talk about, Nadia, right? There is somebody somewhere out there that's already tried to figure similar things out, and we can reach into that, right? And so I know with Yammer, you just post something up, and within 24 hours, somebody somewhere will say, "Yeah, I know a guy, or I know a lady, I know." We've done this, right? So we did a bit of that on the team. We did a bit of reaching out, and we did a bit of that, that collaboration and just spitballing those daft ideas, Jag, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think I mentioned the last panel discussion we had is we had a specific. I mean, this is a first of a kind technology that's never been done before. So I pulled in the engineering team. I was head of engineering at the time, and I pulled in the engineering team and I sat them down and said, "Okay, here's a basic structure and evaluation criteria. Let's say design criteria. This is kind of the aim, the objective, the problem statement. Go for it. Like, what are we going to do?" And we had answers ranging from the most simplistic things to essentially like some things that are just, well beyond the realms of, I think, what's even theoretically possible. But to your point, Mark, it's good to get the full spectrum and get everything out there, and then then chop it down to the constraints of the problem statement and bring it in realisms, adding costs, adding essentially is that technology available? Is it something that needs to be invented further still? Is it knock-on secondary, tertiary kind of innovation ideas here? So yeah, I always approach first of a kind situations in that way. It's just go for it, throw your ideas out. So I'm glad to hear you did that, Mark, on the bridge project.
Hey, Jag, one quick question there as I think about the audience out here and reflecting on what Mark said. And there is the legal and the commercial reality of these types of things. Digital goes through that. I'm sure nuclear goes through that. Talk about that intersection and how you are creative there or overcome those challenges at those intersections of commercial and risk and legal, because I'm sure that's part of your everyday, and it might just help give some inspiration to people thinking about the daunting task of going through those activities.
Yeah, and I think it comes back down, Jeff, back down to setting those out, the requirements, right? There has to be a bound, there has to be a structure. I'll give you a good example again, is in Canada, we're a non-proliferation country, right? So we can't seem to be extracting or doing anything that can lead to, breach of that proliferation agreement. In terms of nuclear weapons, we're not a nuclear weapons state, right? So, so that's one of the key criteria that we have to set forth in the risk and the legal part of that is saying, We can't be seen to be doing anything that can, breach that specific requirement or that condition. Commercially, again, it's, if it's, we go all ideas out, and then in that process of chopping them down and narrowing it down to an option that we want to take forward, commercial comes into it, right? If this is so cost prohibitive that it essentially destroys the business case, then it can't be a viable solution, right? So the problem statement I always put out there is quite broad, and then we add on more evaluation criteria, more, and weight it and score it, and you end up going down a full optioneering exercise where you evaluate all the options against the evaluation criteria you set out, and then it inevitably will leave you down into a specific area. So yes, legal, yes, risk, yes, commercial, but I think the key point there is, Jeff, is adding them in at the right time. If you're being too constrictive too early on, then you may miss out on a huge bunch of ideas, which could seemingly come through. So it's a common thing with the nuclear industry, right? Commercial, we hear about it. Nuclear projects often going over cost. The legal aspects of it, export control, for example. I can't readily send an email out with any random information across country borders for subject to export control. So there is a structure, there is a boundary, there's a skeleton. It is tricky. Wow. You don't want to end up on the wrong side of that conversation, right?
And I would add to that when you think about that balance of both legal risk, policy meeting requirements, right? It's this iterative process where when you bring the right people into the room at the stakeholders at the right time, you're constantly in this alternatives analysis process where you're still heading towards your objective, but it is a structured process where you're weaving through saying what makes the most sense. So by the end, you've really had solid feedback at each of these milestones to make sure that you're ethically in line, to make sure that you have been able to weigh all of the options, that you've been able to integrate what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And that's a big reason why you really want these stakeholders in, because that's what's informing this analysis, right? And I think that's what makes Stantec different, is that we don't just say, okay, here's what we're going to do, let's go do it, right? It is this iterative process of this back and forth to make sure that we're hearing the client, that we're hearing the community when it's applicable, right? That we're always adhering to legal and regulations and risk, and that it's that constant balance as project managers that we're taking in information and then continuing to refine what the approach is, so that by the time you get to the approach moving into the next phase, whether that's preliminary engineering or construction or what have you, you know that alternative has been vetted, you know that it's been influenced by the right folks, and you've already done appropriate due diligence to ensure that it aligns with your legal and regulatory and risk frameworks.
Well, something that might help this risk discussion are metrics, right? So Jeff, let's talk a little bit about measuring the impact of innovation. What are some metrics that you look at? And can you maybe share an example of an innovative solution that you've implemented recently that had a significant impact that could be measured by the client?
Yeah, I'm sort of changing my thinking on some of this. By the way, I was asked to answer this question last minute, so I'm gonna really wing it this time. Even before I talk about the example that I thought of that came to mind, it really does relate back to that business value and human impact metrics that I talked about earlier. But building on Nadia and Jag, your points there, and Mark yourselves, it's some of the metrics, they pertain to what conversation we just had around legal, around commercial and technical. And it's the building that internal capability to deliver those things at scale is really, what the metrics are, that you don't just hatch that day one. It doesn't appear day one. And when I think about it, Mark is lucky to have worked on a bridge project like that with 100-year lifespan. Super cool stuff. It's going to outlive us. Jag, I read your SMR stuff, and we talked about it. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's so cool. You're lucky to work on SMRs. I think it's neat. But luck is that phrase. Luck is really when preparation meets opportunity, and so it's those metrics are really around the preparation that we that we take from a legal, a commercial, and a technical perspective to build the muscle to be able to deliver these types of things. So, rather than metrics, I think it's hard work and recognizing, these folks here are able to articulate, the amazing things that Stantec does overall. But yeah, Stantec at scale is lucky that we put in the time to prepare these types of functions to be able to deliver these types of projects around the globe. So yeah, maybe a bit of a different answer there, though I will answer, more technically, I guess, really, maybe a good example of this. We got lucky on a FEMA project in mid-24 last year, a really traditional flood study in the northeast of the U.S. And, we were lucky that the commercial terms were lump sum, that the client listened to our ability to be a little innovative on this, and we had the preparation of some tooling that was available to use to make this delivery far more efficient. So we did a JAG, to your point about how we convince clients of these things. We did a little pilot project, and we showed it to the customer and said, hey, we think we can deliver this project far more efficiently and effectively using some digital tooling that we had developed over the years, and they agreed. So we were able to deliver this lump sum job far more efficiently, and had staff, instead of thousands of hours of modeling effort, we had staff be able to review the quality and to think about the results far better for that customer. So we delivered more value more efficiently, all because we had the legal framework, we had the commercial framework, and we had the technical expertise to be able to deliver that on a very traditional, really, really traditional delivery engineering project. And I think, just to prove that, I'll put a period in it and I hand it over. That it's just a water example. I always talk about water stuff, but those sorts of preparations they're in infrastructure, they're in buildings, they're in water, they're in energy, they're in mining, they're everywhere, transportation, you name it. We have this capability, and being able to network and find that capability so that we can get lucky with the preparation and opportunity of delivering the legal, the commercial, and the technical capabilities. It's just up to us to go out there and find it.
Yeah, and just to add on, I know you said you're going to take it technical. I'm going to take it really technical, so apologies in advance here, right? So, so just building on what you're saying there, though, Jeff. So, in our industry, we actually use actual measures like the technology readiness levels, right? So these were adopted from NASA, and these are key metrics, really, and they're there to assess essentially the readiness of your technology, right? Like the readiness level of your technology. So NASA came out with this a long time ago, and then that was kind of a framework on how engineering and design progresses with the actual maturity of technology. So when we adopt into the nuclear industry, especially in the UK, it's huge. We ended up, essentially adopting it to the point where we can say categorically, if you're at technology readiness level 1, 2, or 3, kind of a theoretical bench scale as a metric. So once you do your prototyping, like you mentioned, Jeff, there, right, and your benchmarking, then you can start progressing on to kind of 4, 5, and 6, that kind of level. And each one of those bands will have specific criteria to measure against. And then the design also progresses in that way. So 1, 2, 3 will be kind of conceptual feasibility. 4, 5, and 6 will end up being preliminary engineering design. And often we put gates on as well to say you can't really pass preliminary engineering or feed gate unless you got a TRL level 6 from your main equipment and components. And then 7, 8, 9 is kind of examples that are out there in operation around the world, anywhere in the world. So that technology readiness levels is I've done technical feasibility studies on small modular nuclear reactors and technologies to kind of gauge really where we're at in terms of an actual measurable metric of innovation, right? So it's sorry to take it technical again. I must apologize, but it's a concrete example of exactly how I've used metrics in innovation. Right?
Yeah, we're riffing here, so keep me honest. But as you were describing that, I thought about last week I was sitting on my porch and I saw this light in the sky, and it was SpaceX, basically rapidly disassembling. That's what they call it, rapid disassembly.
Yeah.
And that same week, I think a Mars or a moon landing by this company called Intuitive Machines tipped over, so it wasn't viable. And I go back to saying, that technology readiness level isn't necessarily commercial readiness level. And that's what I mean. Like, you may have rapid disassembly. And to me, we're a publicly traded company, we're a business. And, those two things need to align, the commercial readiness and the technology readiness. It's a great measuring stick for where you're at. But in my example that I just gave, where we delivered a water project, really traditional water project, just using a bit of automation that on the readiness scale wouldn't be TRL9 or TRL8. It'd probably be in the incubation stage or a little beyond the incubation stage. But we sought approval and permission, and we did a pilot, we did the quality reviews, and everything checked out. So TRLs as a measuring stick for commercial readiness might result, in rapid disassembly. You got to iterate on these things and go a little bit faster and test and push the boundaries and make sure you're delivering, listening to your customer about, what we need to deliver. What's the business value? What's the business outcome? May not be landing on the moon. We might just be getting to the moon without rapid disassembly.
Sorry, Jeff. I think when you think about metrics too, from a less technical aspect, right? We just kicked off a project where we're looking at needing to pull off some substantial flood flows in a very urban area. And so we're thinking about how do you size that basin, right? Especially when you are really confined with the land use. And so what we hear from the client is this combination of we need to be financially efficient, right? You need to be land efficient. And so when you think about these metrics, we're really looking at, okay, when you look at the increased rates of precipitation using Atlas 14, right? We need to think about the impacts of increased precipitation and climate change so we can calculate the increase in flood flows, which means that you have to, transition that to a basin size. And then we're essentially developing kind of three conceptual alternatives. When you're saying, I have a 30% smaller basin, I have a basin as it was designed, and then I have a 30% larger basin. 30% is one metric, but then when you hear, what's the client's driver? And in this case, one of the client's drivers is one, we need it to function. And two, we want to be able to present some, preliminary cost estimates. And that I think is really important. So we can do a cost benefit analysis to say, here's what you're going to get for a reduction in flood flows. Here's what you're going to get in terms of new or changeable usable land. And here's what you're going to get for a cost. And so to be able to have this combination of metrics when you are presenting innovative or resilient solutions, I think is really important because you need to be able to speak in a language that resonates with the clients. So that's my thought on a less technical approach.
Well, I'm going to continue that less technical approach because I know Jeff and Jag could go technical all day long. So we'll pivot slightly. Mark, I have a question for you. This is actually from the Q&A. So some great contributions in the Q&A. Keep those coming as well as we continue this discussion for the next 15 minutes or so. So Mark, do you have any recommendations on how to cultivate an innovation mindset, even in roles that may not traditionally be seen as quote unquote creative?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. It's teamwork, right? It's pulling people together that you wouldn't ordinarily think, right, can solve things, right? As I think I mentioned earlier on, bringing your graduates in, it's bringing the new people in, it's bringing a whole team of people together to go, how are we gonna figure this out, right? And just spitballing those suggestions, and that cultivates, especially in the newer, younger members of your team, it cultivates that nothing's daft, and I've got some great ideas, and those great ideas may come to fruition. So that's how you cultivate the mindset within your teams. It's just allowing that open dialogue and just encouraging everybody to get together to figure it out. It's pretty straightforward, I think, Mike.
And just kind of building on that, what are some strategies, Mark? Then you mentioned kind of younger employees who may have these great innovative ideas, but maybe hesitant to share them because with older employees who are used to doing things a certain way. So how do you maybe bring out that innovation mindset so people feel comfortable with sharing their innovative ideas, but also getting maybe employees maybe a little more set in their ways to embrace that innovation and kind of have that meld with the more junior employees with the senior level?
Yeah, the challenge is never in the younger people. The challenge is, as you say, it's with us older folk that have been doing it a certain way for a long time, right? So it's just keeping at it, Mike. It's just, I mean, in Stantec, we've got a great program for bringing on, graduates and interns and bringing them on the journey. So we're quite fortunate that we get the right people for the future already, coming in. And I've just seen that change recently, where us older engineers, us older folk are embracing that change. We're understanding that it's good, it's new, it's what the industry needs. It's how we survive, right? Is by thinking about things differently. So I'm seeing that change in culture in the older teams too.
Mark, I think it's also about giving permission. So right before this call, I had a call with a transmission and distribution engineer here at Stantec. And he was saying that a lot of the work in his role is about kind of commodity, right? And so he's like, do this, build this, very straightforward. And he said, how can I bring in more resilience? What does that look like? And I said, well, have you asked your teams? And he said, no, I'm not sure what to ask. And so I helped him create a survey that essentially was allowing and giving permission to say, hey, we know that this is the work we can do. How do we connect better and bring in these additional options and ideas to offer people 3 other components that could relate? And he said, well, I know some people have good ideas. And I said, ask them, right? Bring that out, give them permission and structure, right? You can't just say, well, go paint the moon pink. Well, we kind of want to narrow it in, right? Give folks boundaries to reach client objectives and then say, go. Let's be creative. Let's brainstorm. And even on this call with this engineer that I had, he really was coming up with things. He was like, oh, can we do that? I said, absolutely, right? Ask junior staff. So I think it's about allowing permission and having that communication internally that, again, you still have your eye on the prize with the client's objective to meet the metrics that have been set out. But what does that look like creatively? And then that's where you go back into that iterative process of brainstorming and structuring these alternative analysis and evaluating, say, hey, what about this? What about this? So it's within these boundaries, but it's that giving permission, Mark.
That's actually a great segue into our next audience question, Nadia. So we have the permission to be innovative. We have a bunch of solutions on the table. Jag, this one I want to direct to you to open up. But so if you have multiple innovative options, how do you assess those? So like, is every proposed option perhaps put into a weighted analysis table, or is there a different structure regarding which options might be analyzed? That's a great question from our audience in the Q&A.
Right. Yeah, it goes back to the optioneering we were talking about earlier, right? So, yeah, typically get all the options out on the table, and I assess all of them, right? Doesn't matter how ridiculous it is, we will assess all of them, and it's really important to stay honest with that assessment process as well, right? Because you get a lot of skews going this way, or there's a lot of nuances there that can take you off path real quick. So you got to stay honest, but assess all of them. It's really important to do that. And I'll give you an example. So again, I'm going to take it a little bit technical here. So we have to essentially import something into a radioactive area, right? What's the best way of doing that without the radioactive area contaminants coming out into the main room where people are, right? And potentially hurting someone. So go ahead. What are all the options? We range from everything from an antechamber to an underwater swimming pool system, essentially, almost like a moat around the nuclear facility. And I was at the time I was like, hey, just keep going with it. And it sounded very, very odd. But actually, when we brought the client in, they were saying that sounds like an actual pretty good idea, and this came from an EIT, pretty good idea. And if it could work seismically, then it sounds like the preferred option, actually, right? But and then when we ran through the evaluation criteria with the client, it actually scored low in the end. It was high in a lot of places, but low in the end because of the seismic issues with it, right? And potential loss of containment and whatnot. So it is an eye opener for me, right? With all my experience, my background from the UK nuclear industry and North American nuclear industry is a bit of an eye opener for me, where a seemingly really odd innovative idea from an EIT got right to the final three selection of the 20 odd so that we had. So I love being caught off guard like that. It's really, really good because it shows the process works, right? And it keeps driving that innovation, and it inspires and encourages EITs to think that way. It's a culture, at the end of the day, innovation to me is a bit of a culture where you've got to put it in an incubation chamber and let it grow, right? Especially on our younger folks.
Here's another great one from the Q&A. Jeff, direct this one to you to kick us off. What are some of the ethical considerations related to disruptive innovation?
Yeah, I guess I'd probably talk about a process for considering all the ethical considerations related to disrupting innovation and projects in general. We tend to, especially in digital, speaking strictly from a digital perspective, get so excited about the tech. We always want the new tech, the new thing, the shiny new toy. We sometimes don't always consider those aspects. And I can think of one example in particular. We took a project that ethically came to find out that it probably wasn't in the best location. We shouldn't have taken that location in that project. But we were so enamored by the tech, we didn't even think about it. We had no consideration of that to start with. So our pursuit, we opened it up to a much larger team and brought it to a larger team for evaluation, and listened to the considerations, and then chose a bit of a different path. But it kind of goes back to Nadia, Mark, and Jag. We're talking about involving other people, bringing in other people, listening to other voices that we may not even consider, and being able to make it safe for people to have an opinion, or to raise a voice, or to even to fail. We've had failures in the past, and everybody's failed in their career. And I can think the best boss that I ever had that said, Jeff, that didn't work out, but we're gonna it's okay, and we're gonna get it next time. And that builds that community, that team, that willingness to give input and consider things that may have ethical or technical or risk or legal considerations that we never thought of.
A little bit of an alarm bell blaring here, right? Ethical consideration, disruptive innovation. I'm thinking about Skynet in an 80s movie, right? Like that seems to be the conversation right now with artificial intelligence, right? At what point do you cross that ethical boundary, right? At what point does it become a potential issue, right? And that conversation's going on right now, isn't it, Jeff? Right across.
We're so in love with the tech. Yeah, we could, cross that line. I don't know where that line is, but it's a great point that's brought up. And I'm positive, Jag, you and I talked about it for days on end. We'd never, consider the all of the risks or all of the ethical considerations. So, obviously it goes back to some of the legal things, but even beyond legal, doing what's right is not a one person's decision. It's a community's decision, and you got to consider all the stakeholders, making it safe to get input to consider any of those alternatives or risks that you may have.
All right, we have 5 minutes left in this discussion, so we're going to have a lightning round question. So this is for all four of you, maybe answers 30 seconds or less. What advice do you have for people that are looking for new ideas or approaches to existing problems? How can they be successful? Nadia, let's start with you.
I think you need to be clear on what needs to happen and making sure that you're adhering to that, and then be open to everything else. So making sure that it's very clear on what the needs and the wants are for the project objective. Things that need to happen, but then be innovative and creative about everything else. Talk to people, talk to consultants, talk to your neighbors, ask people, and be open.
Awesome. Thanks, Nadia. Mark?
Courage. Just have the courage. Have the courage to mix it up and change it. Have the courage to work as a wide. Bring your client in. Bring your stakeholders in. Have that courage to spitball it and just chuck some ideas out there and work through it.
Awesome. Succinct. I love it. Jag?
I think I can go back to what I was talking about earlier, and I think Nadia touched on it right now as well. Clearly define the problem statement, right? Once you clearly define the problem statement, open the doors to innovation. Go out there, see what's out there in the universe, see what's theoretically possible. And even in some cases, that's not even theoretically possible. Put it on the table, evaluate it, talk about it, and start adding the constraints on to drive you down a solution.
Thank you, Jag. Jeff, bring us home.
It's safe to be able to ask, and don't be for 1 second hesitant. So yeah, Mark's, I like your succinct answer. So broadly speaking, it's safe. And I bet that somebody's already thought of that problem before. And, we probably already have a head start on solving it. At the tactical level, there's the idea machine, there's your boss, there's myself or anybody on this call. I'm volunteering, y'all, but sorry, you're volunteered. Try any of those tactical options if you have an idea and want to pursue a thought or a shortcut or digital or non-digital efficiency. It's safe.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists and to all of you for joining this conversation. We're actually going to have 3 more Spark films about the human impact of innovation premiering later this year, which will be followed by a panel discussion with each film's participants. Our next film features the impact of a devastating wildfire and debris flow in rural Colorado and the work that Stantec is doing to help communities mitigate their post-wildfire debris flow risks in the future. So stay tuned for details on that. Have yourselves a great day, and I hope you'll join us next time.
Thank you very much. Cheers.